They offered him exile. They offered him silence. He chose a cup of poison instead. In the year 399 BC, in the city that invented democracy, a 70-year-old man was sentenced to death. His crime was not murder. It was not theft or treason. His crime was asking questions. The trial of Socrates was not about one man. It was about the price of thinking for yourself. And 2,400 years later, we still have not settled the bill. This is the story of why Socrates drank the hemlock. Not because he had to, but because everything he had ever taught demanded it. And this story matters to this channel more than any other. Because the name you are watching right now, Examined Life, comes from what Socrates said in that courtroom on the day he chose to die. To understand why Athens killed its greatest thinker, you have to understand what Athens had just been through. By 399 BC, the city was exhausted. The Peloponnesian War, a brutal, decades-long conflict with Sparta, had ended only 5 years earlier, and Athens had lost. Not just a war, but its empire, its wealth, its confidence, and nearly its democracy. In 404 BC, a pro-Spartan oligarchy known as the 30 Tyrants had seized power and ruled through fear for 8 months before democracy was restored. The restored democracy was fragile. The Athenians were suspicious, wounded, and looking for someone to blame, a mixture of defiance and paranoia, patriotism and score settling. And in the middle of this bruised city there was Socrates, walking through the agora, talking, always talking, dismantling the certainties that people clung to in uncertain times. He had been doing this for decades, but now his questions did not feel like philosophy. They felt like provocation. To call Socrates a philosopher is technically correct, but somehow insufficient. He did not write books. He did not run a school. He did not charge fees. He simply walked through Athens and talked to people, politicians, craftsmen, poets, generals, and asked them to explain what they thought they knew. What is justice? What is courage? What does it mean to live a good life? Simple questions. But Socrates had a devastating method. Through careful, relentless dialogue, what we now call the Socratic method, he would show his conversation partners that they did not actually know what they claimed to know. The politician could not define justice. The general could not explain where courage ended and recklessness began. The poet who wrote about beauty could not say what beauty was. Socrates compared himself to a gadfly, a horsefly that stings a large, sluggish horse to keep it awake. Athens was the horse, he was the sting, and the horse he knew might eventually swat him. He was not doing this to humiliate people. He genuinely believed that the confident fool causes more damage than the person who recognizes their own ignorance. The one who knows they do not know can at least begin to learn. This made him beloved among the young, who found it exhilarating to watch powerful men lose arguments, and it made him despised among the powerful, who did not appreciate a barefoot old man exposing the gaps in their thinking. In 399 BC, 3 Athenian citizens, Meletus, Anytus, and Lycon, brought formal charges against Socrates. The indictment had 2 parts: corrupting the youth and impiety, refusing to acknowledge the gods of the city and introducing new spiritual beings. These charges were partly political, partly personal. Anytus was a powerful politician whose son had become one of Socrates' followers. Several of Socrates' former associates, including Alcibiades and Critias, had gone on to become traitors or tyrants. The implication was clear: Socrates taught young men to question authority, and look what happened. The impiety charge was more subtle. Socrates spoke often of a personal daimonion, an inner voice that warned him when he was about to make a mistake. This was not one of the official gods. In a culture where civic religion and civic loyalty were deeply intertwined, claiming a private channel to the divine was itself a political act. The trial was held before a jury of 501 citizens, not legal scholars, shopkeepers, farmers, veterans, men who had lived through war and dictatorship and were not in the mood for nuance. What Socrates said at his trial is recorded, or at least reimagined by his student Plato in a work called The Apology. The title is misleading. In Greek, apologia does not mean apology, it means defense, and Socrates did not apologize for anything. He told the jury he would not beg for mercy. He would not bring his weeping children before them. He would not play the humble defendant. He would simply tell the truth about who he was and what he had done, and let them decide. He explained the origin of his mission. Years earlier, his friend Chaerephon had asked the oracle at Delphi if anyone was wiser than Socrates. The oracle said no. Socrates, confused, because he did not consider himself wise, set out to find someone wiser. He spoke to politicians, poets, craftsmen. In every case he found the same thing. These people thought they were wise but were not. Socrates, at least, knew he did not know. That, he concluded, was the only way in which he was wiser than anyone else. Then he said something that has echoed through the centuries and straight into the name of this channel. The unexamined life is not worth living. Not, the unexamined life is less pleasant. Not, could be improved. Not worth living. Socrates is saying that a human life without self-reflection, without the willingness to confront your own beliefs, that life is fundamentally empty regardless of its comfort. This is not a casual remark. It is the thesis that cost him his life. He told a room full of men who held his fate in their hands that what he did, questioning, probing, refusing easy answers, was more important than survival. The jury found him guilty by a vote of 280 to 221. Not a landslide. In the Athenian system, the convicted man could propose an alternative punishment. Meletus had asked for death. Socrates could have proposed exile, a fine, or simply promised to stop philosophizing. Any of these would have saved his life. He did none of them. With characteristic irony, he suggested that his punishment should be free meals at the Prytaneum, the hall where Athens honored its Olympic victors. He genuinely believed his service to the city, waking people up, forcing them to think, was more valuable than any medal. When the jury did not find this amusing, he offered a modest fine, but he made it clear he would not agree to stop philosophizing. "I shall obey the god rather than you," he told them. The jury, perhaps angered by his defiance, voted for death, this time by a wider margin. Socrates did not stumble into this sentence. He chose it. He had multiple off-ramps, and he drove past every one. After the sentencing, his wealthy friends arranged an escape. Crito, one of his closest companions, came with everything prepared: bribes paid, a boat waiting, a safe house in Thessaly. All Socrates had to do was walk out the door. He refused. This is the question that has haunted philosophy for over 2 millennia. Why did he refuse to escape? Why did he choose the hemlock? The most common answer is the one Plato gives him in the Crito. Socrates believed in the rule of law. He had lived his entire life as a citizen of Athens under its laws, benefiting from its institutions. To flee when the law turned against him would be to say that laws are only worth following when they are convenient. It would undermine the very fabric of civic life. But I think there is something deeper. Socrates had spent his entire adult life telling people that virtue matters more than comfort, that truth matters more than approval, that the soul is more important than the body. He told the young men of Athens to care about wisdom rather than wealth, about character rather than reputation. If he fled, if he accepted exile and lived out his remaining years as a quiet old man in Thessaly, no longer philosophizing, no longer stinging the horse, he would have proven his accusers right. He would have shown that when the stakes were real, when it was not just a theoretical exercise in the agora but his actual life on the line, he He did not really believe what he taught. The hemlock was not a tragedy that happened to Socrates. It was the final act of a consistent life. It was the moment where his philosophy and his existence became the same thing. You cannot spend decades telling people that the unexamined life is not worth living, and then, when the city tells you to stop examining, choose to live anyway. Not if you mean what you say. Now, it is worth asking the uncomfortable question. Was this really philosophical consistency, or was it something less admirable? Some historians have suggested vanity. Socrates was 70. He had only a few years left. Dying for his principles was a better exit than fading into irrelevance. Martyrdom was the ultimate form of winning the argument. You cannot refute a dead man. Others have suggested stubbornness, that he was so determined not to give his accusers the satisfaction of seeing him bend, that he chose death out of pride rather than principle. These are not unreasonable readings, but I do not find them convincing. Pride does not explain the calm. Every account we have of Socrates' final hours, from Plato's Phaedo, describes a man who was serene, even cheerful. He spent his last day in philosophical conversation about the soul. He comforted his weeping friends. He bathed so the women who prepared his body would not have to wash a corpse. When the jailer brought the cup, he drank it without hesitation. This is not the behavior of a man driven by ego. This is a man at peace with the conclusion his principles led to. He did not want to die. He simply could not accept the alternative, a silent life, an exiled life, a life where he nodded along with things he knew to be false. That was, for Socrates, not a life at all. His death was not a protest. It was a proof. We live in an age where self-censorship is the default, where people carefully calibrate their opinions to avoid friction, where the examined life is not punished by hemlock, but by something almost as effective: social disapproval, professional risk, the quiet withdrawal of belonging. Most of us do not face death for our convictions. We face discomfort, and that, apparently, is enough. I think Socrates would find that fascinating, not contemptible, fascinating. He would want to understand why. He would sit down with you in a coffee shop the way he once sat down with people in the Agora, and he would ask, "What do you believe? Why do you believe it? Have you examined it? And if you have not, why do you call it yours?" The unexamined life is not worth living. That line is the reason this channel exists. Not because it is a clever slogan, but because I think Socrates identified something that most of us spend our lives avoiding. The realization that comfort and meaning are not the same thing. That you can have a perfectly pleasant life and still, in some fundamental sense, not be living it. Socrates did not drink the hemlock because he was brave. He drank it because for him the alternative was already a kind of death. A slower one, a quieter one. The kind where you are still breathing, but you have stopped asking the questions that make breathing worthwhile. He chose the cup, and in doing so, he left us with the question that still matters most. What would you be unwilling to stop thinking, even if they asked you nicely?